George, proud to be serving as the principal of Champlain Park High School in my 9th year. I'm a proud graduate of this school district. I'm a graduate of Coon Rapids High School in 1995. I began teaching at Coon Rapids High School. In 2001, I was a special education teacher, worked with students with emotional and behavioral disorders, and had the opportunity to move into an administrative role where I was in a position for 5 years at Coon Rapids, and as I said, I've been serving my role 9 years at Champlain Park High School. The topics today and the conversations around chemical use and abuse are something that are near and dear to me. I have family members who are in-laws who are recovering meth addicts, and to this day they continue to struggle with substance abuse. My own personal journey has been quite challenging with chemicals and controlled substances. As a person serving in a parental role at a very young age, at the age of 24, my wife and I were caring for our younger siblings. My sibling-in-law, her younger siblings, who were all in their teens, and as I said, each one of them was struggling through addictions. And so for much of our adult life, we've been helping people in our own personal lives work through addiction, and so it's also been a passion of mine on the side to work with families. It was about 4 years ago, a few parents from Champlain Park High School, one who was here, she'll be on the panel later, Rose McKinney, who was to me just a parent, if I can say it that way, is just a parent of one of the 2,900 or so kids at Champlain Park High School. But she had the courage one day to approach me and say, hey, Mr. George, I've got a question for you. What are your thoughts about us getting together and putting together some informational sessions around chemicals and controlled substances for our families? And what Rose didn't know is that I had a passion for the topic of conversation. And what I didn't know was how much chemicals and controlled substances had impacted her life as well. And she may have a chance to share that with you later. I won't share her story. So 4 years ago we began this journey, and we've done several presentations through the context of a group called Engaging Families, where we've traveled around the district. We've hosted presentations at Champlain Park. We've hosted a variety of events here, as well as at the 5 high schools. And we've started to try to sort of narrow our scope in terms of the presentation series, hoping that what becomes sort of engaged in the fabric of the Anoka-Hennepin School District is continual work about chemical health and mental health. And so a couple of years ago, a committee was formed from the Chemical Health Advisory Committee, and this is now a product of the work of that Chemical Health Advisory Committee, and we've got some really great partnerships. And I want to thank many of those partnerships, the folks who are here today supporting us. Hopefully you had a chance to stop by their tables. They'll be here, they're here now, and they'll be here after to help you. And again, they're really fantastic partnerships that we've created. Some of these groups of folks come in and do presentations with our students in school. And like anything, education is the key. And as the adults in the room here, you're going to find out that when you go home tonight and talk to your youth, your child about this, there's a good chance they know more about this than you do, right? And the key to us being able to identify is kind of in a simple statement. It actually used to be the title of my presentation at my business that I owned. If you don't know what to expect, you can't expect to know. Right? So realistically, if there's a red flag waving at you and you don't realize that it's a red flag, then you won't ever see that red flag. Okay? So hopefully you leave here today with a better understanding of chemicals and controlled substances, and really today a focus on vaping, with the idea that you can have really constructive conversations with your loved ones at home around the topic of chemicals and controlled substances again, and certainly vaping, which I will say to all of us, especially in the educational organization, has been a challenge. I was joking up here with Greg Cole, the principal of Compass Programs, who you'll meet later. I can't remember the last time I busted a kid with a cigarette or a pack of cigarettes. But we're suspending kids for tobacco-related things regularly in our school systems. Okay? We'll have, like I said, we'll have some presenters here today. We've got some folks, Heidi and Alex from the American Lung Association, a good friend of mine and colleague at Champlain Park High School, Detective Andy Dickman, Greg Cole, who I just mentioned, who's the principal of essentially our Compass programs, our expulsions, and school discipline. He'll give you some perspective. And on the right there are some topics. Again, I've kind of articulated our mission and vision for our work. This is really important stuff, and we know that the best way that we can serve kids is to have them feel safe and welcome in a school and free of distractions, right? And we know that having addictions are distractions for kids when they come into the context of our buildings, right? And those things get in the way of learning. We know that for sure. And so as a school district, we're working really hard to break down those barriers that get in the way of learning and success in an effort to really get to that and help our kids succeed. Our goals today, you can certainly read them. Again, we're going to go over some statistics and information from the American Lung Association. We're going to also sneak in some things relative to other chemicals and controlled substances that Detective Dickman will talk about. We hope to give you some perspectives of what it's like from our school system through the panel discussion. And just know that as we go throughout this presentation, we'll distribute some note cards to you. And no question is a dumb question. Okay, so at the end, I'll be your MC and I'll help facilitate or moderate a panel discussion. And we're all here sort of in the nest together, hoping to learn, okay? Again, as I mentioned, we've got some really great partnerships through this work, and we've had some really fantastic partnerships throughout the course of the 4 years, at least of my involvement in this work. Many of those partners are here today, and as we continue to do this work, it is really important to have strong partnerships with experts, right? I have an expertise in being a principal of a school. I don't have an expertise in talking to you about the impacts of, the medical impacts of e-cig use. I can tell you what it does from a school perspective, right? And that's why it's really important for us to have fantastic partnerships. I do want to make sure that I mention Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, Know the Truth. They come into our health classes for students in 10th grade. They also come and visit and do presentations for our middle schools. They do a really good job talking about the risks of a variety of chemicals and controlled substances that our students are potentially exposed to, not just in school, but certainly outside of school. Our school nurses, social workers, counselors, health therapists, we have a really strong, positive structure that we have accessible for students and families for support. But one of the things that we know is really challenging for families in situations like this, and is really the reason why Rose McKinney reached out to me in the first place, was when she started to see things spiraling down in her role as a parent with one of her kids, the question was, is who do I turn to? And when I turn to that person, do they actually know where to point me in terms of the direction that I need to go? All right, or is a red flag go up for them that's going to help direct me in accessing the resources I need? So we continue to educate ourselves around these topics, and we have really good supportive things. Once we realize that there's a challenge, our system has some really good mechanisms in place to be able to support our students, from chemical prevention support in our buildings to mental health support to nurses and school counselors. We have support groups that are facilitated. Amber is here. Amber works at our high schools. She travels around to all of our high schools on a rotational basis, providing support. And certainly we have access to additional chemical health resources. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce to you Alex and Heidi. They are here to present a ton of information. We're going to actually transition on our slides from our district presentation to their presentation. But if you could, please join me in welcoming Heidi and Alex as they are here to share a bunch of helpful information.
Well, thank you very much for having us tonight. My name is Heidi Larson with the American Lung Association, and my colleague Alex is also here. She's going to be talking a little bit some more on the statistics and kind of setting up the background for tonight as well. And I always like to talk a little bit about why I do what I do and why I'm able to be here tonight. So first of all, through something called the Statewide Health Improvement Partnership, or SHIP for short, its funds are given to the counties in Minnesota, and they can work on various initiatives, one of them being tobacco-free living. So through a great partnership that the Lung Association has with Anoka County Public Health and Environment, I'm able to be here, and we do some work in the county with them. So things like smoke-free multi-unit housing, some different educational opportunities, some community events. So big thanks to them for the partnership that we have. And at the Lung Association, we do have a very clear vision and mission. The vision is to see a world free from lung disease. The mission that drives that is to save lives by improving lung health and preventing lung disease. We have a lot of different initiatives that really work towards this vision and this mission. So we have folks that are working on clean outdoor air, things like biodiesel, electric vehicles. We have folks dedicated to lung health issues, so lung cancer, asthma, COPD, and then a huge area that we also cover is tobacco control. So that's the area that I work in. And just to give you a little perspective on that, 480,000 deaths per year happen in the United States from tobacco-related disease and illness. And so that's more than things like suicides, car accidents, murders combined. And I don't mean to downplay any of those causes of death by any means, but it really does just show how huge of a scope and how big of a problem that tobacco really is. And so the Lung Association is very much aware of that. And tonight, as you'll hear a lot, new emerging concern is the electronic cigarette use, specifically by our youth populations. So tonight what we're going to talk about is some smoking rates, some tobacco use rates, just to kind of set the stage and get a good background and understanding on what does that currently look like in our state. We'll go over some key findings from the Minnesota Department of Health Youth Tobacco Survey. We'll talk about some actual tobacco products, so e-cigarettes. Maybe some of you are very familiar with these, maybe some of you are not. Maybe you've seen them before and didn't even know what it was. So we'll go over some of those actual products. And then talk a little bit about the impact of tobacco and what we can do about it. And I do also want to just mention and stress that when we talk about tobacco tonight, it does refer to the produced commercial tobacco and not to the sacred traditional tobacco that's used by American Indians and other groups. So just wanted to mention that and let you know that when we talk about tobacco, it's the commercial tobacco. And one more point I do also want to mention, because sometimes we get some questions on this and it can be confusing, but when we go over some of these slides and the information and we talk about tobacco use and tobacco products, I do want to make it very clear that e-cigarettes are tobacco products. So years ago, about 10 or so years ago, when e-cigarettes first came to the United States from China, from overseas, the FDA did actually look at these products and think, maybe this could be a drug delivery system. We should regulate these products. And Big Tobacco actually took the FDA to court. They sued them and they won to say that they do not want to be regulated. They're not the cessation device. That's what the FDA originally thought that they could be used for. So through all of that, e-cigarettes are regulated as tobacco products, but they are not regulated as cessation devices. So just wanted to give that background as well. Sometimes we hear a major point or major argument is that electronic cigarettes are helpful for adults to quit smoking. Well, when in fact we know that that is actually not the case. There's no FDA-approved e-cigarette that's a smoking cessation device. So when you see some of these statistics, we'll clarify that sometimes tobacco is lumped in, but e-cigarettes are all referred to as the same type of product because they are tobacco products. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex. She's going to be talking a little bit about some statistics, the background in our state, and what the current tobacco use and smoking rates are looking like.
All right, so I'll just start out by mentioning that the current adult in Minnesota is smoking at a rate of about 13.8%. So you can see here that there's been a pretty clear downward trend since the adult tobacco survey began in 1999, but this most recent data point is the lowest decrease that we've seen since the beginning. And then smoking prevalence does vary by age group as well. So this is that adult data, but you can see that the age group, ages 18 to 24, does give us kind of a nice look at what is happening in our youth population as well. So here we can see that the ages 18 to 24 group is smoking at a rate of about half of what they were in 2015, so it's a great trend to have. And then tobacco use does vary by too. So looking at e-cigarettes here, we can see that the adult data hasn't changed too much between 2014 and 2018. Just kind of really showing us that a lot of adults aren't using e-cigarettes as a cessation device. And the increase in e-cigarette use that we're seeing is really from that youth population. And looking at e-cigarette use then, so we can see that the age group 18 to 24 is about double what it was in 2014 in its e-cigarette use. This slide is kind of nice just to show really the dangers of e-cigarettes. So this is based off a survey done in 2014 and 2018. and asked some questions kind of about e-cigarette use, who was really using those e-cigarettes. And you can see here that the percentage of people that never smoked but has used an e-cigarette is really a lot bigger than it was in 2014. So this just kind of shows that maybe someone who has never used a tobacco product before is really picking up that e-cigarette to try. So just to kind of bring it a little closer to home, we did pull the data from Anoka County and Hennepin County. So here we can see that the adult in Anoka County is smoking at a rate a little lower than the state average, so that's great. And we do have this youth data as well. So this is looking at 9th and 11th graders. This data is only a couple years old, but it's pretty outdated by now. Current estimates are showing e-cigarette use to be a lot more than it's showing here. And because of that big growth in e-cigarette use and the big changes that are happening so quickly, it's really hard to keep up statistically with what's going on. And then we do have that Hennepin County as well. So also adults here are smoking at a rate a little lower than the state average. And that youth data. So current estimates are estimating about a 90% increase in 12th grade e-cigarette use, about a 96% increase in 10th graders, and 74% in 8th graders. So those are some really big numbers, really big increases that we're seeing. And the Surgeon General has issued a advisory around this. Youth e-cigarette use is really considered an epidemic now. And it's important to know that the Surgeon General doesn't really just throw out these advisories. This is really one of 5 in 20 years that has been put out, and the only one on tobacco. So definitely a very big deal. All right, and so the big takeaway here is that youth tobacco has increased for the first time in 17 years, and that e-cigarette use has increased by about 50% since 2014. So those are kind of some dark, dreary facts, but there is some good news. So less youth are smoking, which is a great trend to see. But this does kind of reiterate the fact that that increase in tobacco use that we're seeing in youth is really because of those e-cigarettes. So the question kind of becomes then, why is this happening? What is driving this trend? And why are 1 in 5 high schoolers using e-cigarettes? And the reason for this really is big tobacco and very aggressive marketing campaigns that are aimed at youth. So there is really a plan in place to addict a whole new generation to tobacco, and it's kind of working right now. E-cigarettes are really easy to access for a lot of youth. You might see vape shops kind of popping up in your communities, and a lot of retail outlets also will sell those. And then those flavors that really attract the youth population. So there's some crazy flavors out there: gummy bear, bubble gum, cotton candy, things like that that are really aimed at that youth population that adults really might not seek out. So you can kind of see a clear trend in the marketing towards our youth. So I'll turn it back over to Heidi now.
Yeah, thanks Alex for going over some of that data. It is really quite shocking when government body and the Surgeon General is declared youth e-cigarette use an epidemic and issued an advisory. It's something that is not done lightly, so we really do need to pay attention to this. So what are e-cigs, electronic cigarettes, electronic nicotine delivery systems? They go by a lot of different names. Maybe some of you are familiar with some of these products, maybe not. This slide just shows some examples of the products. So on the far left side, that is more of a cig-alike product, so it looks pretty identical to a regular combustible tobacco cigarette, and they're usually disposable. In the middle there, you can see that larger tank device, or mod, sometimes they're called. They're pretty high-tech devices. You can change the temperature setting to change the amount of vapor that you get. If you're driving down the road and maybe you see, now that it's nicer weather, you might see this. I know I just saw somebody yesterday. If you see a large cloud of vapor, a large plume of smoke come from a car, it's most likely that somebody in that car is using one of those larger tank devices in the middle. And then on the right side, these are some of the newer products, and these are always changing. Big Tobacco is very good at what they do. It's very good at marketing and concealing and trying to trick and hide these products. I know that some of our youth don't even recognize that these products are actually electronic cigarettes, that they are tobacco products. So the product right here, this one is called a Juul, and it looks pretty identical to a flash drive or USB drive. And it does actually need to charge, even plug into a computer. So sometimes we've heard of kids charging their devices, using their devices in class, and teachers maybe don't know what these are. We've heard that parents maybe accidentally watched one of these and gave it back to the child thinking that it was a USB flash drive. So these products are always changing. And from some of our colleagues over in California, which might be the case in Minnesota now too, we've heard that the Juul is so yesterday, and new devices are coming out. So something like the Soren is another very popular device. So the two on the right here, those are examples of Soren products. So Soren Air on the far right, Soren Drop is the next one towards the middle. So it really just shows that these are always changing. They don't technically have to look like cigarettes. They come in all shapes and sizes. And this is just another graphic showing similar products. So e-pipes, e-cigars, those larger tank devices I was talking about, some cig-like disposable products, and then the Juul, that's more popular. So really some key facts about these devices. They come in all shapes and sizes. Nearly all e-cigarettes do contain nicotine. So I do also want to remind folks that the e-juice, the e-liquid that you put into these devices, it's an unregulated product. And so I could go home and cook up some e-juice in my bathtub and sell it to you, and you would have no idea what's in it. So even if somebody is claiming that my e-juice does not have any nicotine, it's 0%, when tested, there was a random test done, samples of many different types of e-juices and e-cigarettes. Virtually all of them did actually contain some amount of nicotine. And it is very scary. Some of these nicotine concentrations and contents can be very high. We have an entire generation now that are honestly struggling with chemical dependency and addiction. That's our kids. No amount of nicotine is safe for youth. So even if youth thinks that their e-cig or their product doesn't have any nicotine, it's most likely it does. And we know that with the developing brain that no amount is safe for youth. It really does prime the adolescent brain for addiction and really can harm the developing brain. So compared to youth who have never used them as well, youth who have tried e-cigarettes are 2 times as likely to pick up smoking. And we're hearing from the Minnesota Department of Health that this number is outdated as well. It could be up to 4 times as likely. What is in this? Is it harmless? Is it just fruity? We know that there are harmful constituents in the vape cloud in using e-cigarettes. E-cigarette use is linked to irreversible lung damage. So you might hear that we don't know the long-term effects. And well, yes, we are still working on some long-term studies on the health effects of these products. We do know that in a vape cloud, I know there's a picture up there with just some of the constituents that are found in that vape cloud, that secondhand vapor, that emission. They are not safe to inhale. Really, the public health standards should be breathing clean air. And if we're doing anything less than that, we are putting our lungs at risk. And so sometimes we hear that, oh, these products are less harmful than combustible tobacco, less harmful than cigarettes. Some kids perceive them as good. They taste good. They maybe make me feel good in the moment. But we do actually know that these products do cause irreversible lung damage and are not safe. And e-cigarettes are not an FDA-approved smoking cessation device. I know I mentioned that in the very beginning. So no device has been proven safe and effective to help adult smokers or help somebody who smokes quit. So I want to go a little bit more detail on some of these products, just to talk a little bit more about them. I know that at the resource table, I do have some examples with me tonight. So if you have not seen these, or you're curious to actually hold one in your hand, see how it feels, I encourage you to come over and check them out. Also interesting is noting the packaging that they come in. So some of these packages are very sleek, kind of like an Apple product, something that looks very appealing. So we have some examples, and I definitely encourage you to check them out. But the Juul, this is one that is very popular. And as I believe I had mentioned, some youth don't even recognize it as an electronic cigarette. They're not vaping, they're juuling. They're not using an e-cigarette, they're using a Juul. And they do come in different flavors. I have an example up here. Some of the flavors might have changed since I made this, but anything from mint, fruit medley, creme brulee, very appealing flavors that we know are very attractive to youth. And I know Alex was talking a little bit about the marketing of these products, and a little bit more about how in the beginning there was a lot of aggressive marketing tactics. Again, we know Big Tobacco is very good at what they do at marketing these tobacco products to our kids. So really, if you have maybe not seen some of the marketing, it's because you're not the target. But really the damage has been done, and it's all out there on Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram. Maybe you've heard in the news that the FDA is cracking down on Juul and cracking down on their marketing. Well, that is a good step, and Juul has taken some steps to take some of that down and only show adults in their marketing. Again, the damage is done. There's so much out there on social media that our kids are seeing. If you just Google or YouTube vape tricks, vape cloud, you'll be pretty amazed at what you see, or maybe not amazed. Young kids I've seen as young as 12, 13 posting videos on how to do tricks with their Juul and their vapes. So it is really, really already all out there. The Soren is another device that I had mentioned that is pretty popular. So the Soren Air, it kind of looks similar to an iPhone. It even comes in a rose gold color. And the Soren Drop is very sleek, and it's kind of fun to hold. I have one with me if you are interested in looking at it. But one of the main points that I really want you to remember is the amount of nicotine in these products. So with the Soren, and then also with the Juul, the Soren is compatible with something called, you might see up there, nic salt e-liquids, so salt nicotine, and it can also be used with free-base nicotine. And the Juul, why that is so addictive is because it does use the salt-based nicotine. And just a little quick explanation on what that means. So when you extract nicotine from a tobacco plant, that is called free-base nicotine. And the acidity is such that it causes a really harsh throat hit. It doesn't feel good. You might cough in the moment, and you definitely have a natural reaction to the pH level of that free-base nicotine. So what Juul has done, and also other e-juice manufacturers, they have added acid to that free-base nicotine to make it so it goes down smoother. It's very smooth, it tastes good, it feels good. You don't get that natural cough and that natural reaction from the harshness of the nicotine. It's really masked by changing the pH level of that free-base nicotine when you extract that from the tobacco plant. And so some of these devices, so for example, one Juul pod, which I have an example of as well, is equivalent to about an entire pack of cigarettes. We are also seeing some new data come out that it could be equivalent to as much nicotine as 40 cigarettes, so a lot of nicotine. And if you do think about it, years ago when maybe youth were smoking, for example, it would maybe be sneaking one at lunch or sneaking one after school. It would be very few, maybe 3 in a day at most. So lower nicotine level. Kids in school, we are hearing them, they could easily go through an entire pod a day, sometimes even more. So the amount of nicotine that our kids are getting is very alarming. And I know there was actually a recent story that was done, and we've heard the term of kids using the term nic sick. So kids are experiencing nicotine poisoning, and they're saying, oh, you just got nic sick from your e-cig. like it's no big deal. But we have people working all over the state, and virtually all schools, this is an issue. We've had colleagues that, I forget exactly where they were, but we're hearing that kids were getting sick and using this term, sometimes even hospitalization, fainting. So it's very scary the amount of nicotine that our kids are getting. And nicotine is very addictive. And here's just a graphic showing some of the tobacco products compared to some of our products that you might find in our kids' backpacks. So it's kind of hard to tell sometimes if you're a teacher or parent what these products look like. So it might be kind of small, but just to point out that some of these products can look very similar to pens, to highlighters, USB flash drives, mints. So really it just shows a wide array of tobacco products mixed right in with typical school supplies, typical office products, and sometimes it's really hard to identify and hard to tell which is which. This is another interesting company. I also have an example of this at the resource table. Vaporware. Kids are very creative. Kids are very good at concealing e-cigarettes, their vaping devices, and this is an example of a company that is making it even easier for kids to vape hands-free anywhere they want. Isn't it just so annoying when you're gaming and you have to stop to vape? That's just not something that you should have to worry about. Buy our product and you can vape hands-free while you game, while you do whatever you're doing. So it's kind of laughable, but it is a very real product and something that we are seeing. So you can buy a hoodie that has the attachments. You can plug your Juul or your whatever device you're using directly into the string. It has a stealth pocket that you just slip into the side, and then you vape through the other string, and you can either blow it into your sleeve or kind of hold your breath, and you can't really tell the vapor that's coming out from using the product. So kids can be using these in school. I know we've heard a lot of stories from colleagues as well. So maybe some young females are hiding their vapes in tampon wrappers or in their bras because what school staff is going to search their bra in a shoe, in a pocket. So sometimes kids are seeking other means to really be tricky and hide these. But I think a really big, important piece of this too is just to recognize that's addiction. That's a level of addiction. They're addicted to nicotine when they maybe can't go the entire school day, that they have to shove their vape in their bra or wear one of these products to hands-free vape when they're after school. It really does show the chemical dependency and the issue that's happening in our youth population. This is a very important slide. It really does show how addicting these products are. So the yellowish color shows the amount of nicotine that you get when you puff on the combustible cigarette. So you can see that there's a direct spike right away. You get that nicotine hit. We know that cigarettes are a great drug delivery system. It takes seconds to get the nicotine into the brain through the inhalation. And so that's why cigarettes are nicotine. They're very addicting. The average e-cigarette, the free-base nicotine that I was talking about, is this bottom line here. So it really does just kind of give just a low level, kind of constantly. There's not really that spike. But then as you can see in the middle, the Juul, it pretty much identically mimics a cigarette. So you get that direct hit, that direct spike using the nicotine salts because it does have that much higher concentration of nicotine. So common questions that we get. Are e-cigarettes less harmful than cigarettes? I know I talked about this a little bit already. Really, the public health standard should be breathing clean air. If we're doing anything other than that, we are putting our lungs at risk. E-cigarettes do almost always contain nicotine, even if the packaging claims or the person promises that there's no nicotine in their e-juice. It's most likely that it does contain some form of nicotine. And we do know that nicotine exposure during adolescence can harm the developing brain. Our brains aren't fully developed until around the age of 25 or so. And when young kids, our youth, our children are using these products and exposing their brains to nicotine, they are actually changing their brain chemistry. And and that can set themselves up for a lifelong struggle with addiction. The most popular e-cigarette among teens is Juul, so I mentioned that that's kind of changing. It might be Soren, it might be some other products, but it is one that you might have heard in the news with the FDA really trying to crack down a little bit and try to regulate. All Juul pods do contain nicotine, even if the youth doesn't realize. Maybe it just smells like fruit and someone's doing it in the bathroom at school and I might just try it. It does contain nicotine. And as we talked about, one Juul pod may contain as much nicotine as a pack of cigarettes that might actually even be higher. But isn't it just water vapor? Well, the only substance in the entire world that can produce water vapor is water. So unless you're putting only water in these devices, you're going to be getting something else. So the aerosol produced by e-cigarettes does contain harmful constituents. Some of them are listed up here. Even in that big cloud, that secondhand emission, there are heavy metals, formaldehyde, a lot of harmful chemicals. Some of the flavoring agents as well are of particular concern. Maybe you've heard of popcorn lung before. So in popcorn factories, the flavor that was used to make popcorn was actually causing the factory workers to get sick and have lung disease and have popcorn lung. So some of that same exact flavoring, those flavoring agents that were used in flavoring popcorn are used in these types of devices. And the flavors do carry health risks, so even if it feels good, it tastes good, it smells good, it's minty or it's fruity, it is not good for your lungs. Not good for you. And what are those health risks then? I know we've talked about some already, but they really, e-cigarettes do contain harmful constituents, chemicals that do cause irreversible lung damage. I do have some handouts and some information, some more links to some research on that if you're interested in checking those out. We know nicotine is highly addictive, and especially exposure during adolescence. Addiction can happen so quickly. Youth who use e-cigarettes are more likely to go on to use traditional cigarettes, so 2 times, even up to 4 times as likely. And in the short term, the aerosol, when it does get into your lungs, it might cause some irritation, some throat irritation, make you get colds more often or get sick more often or get the flu. And we do know that long-term studies are still being done, but there is irreversible lung damage that can happen from using these products. Is this really an epidemic? Yes, the American Lung Association does firmly believe that this is an epidemic. Youth e-cigarette use has reached epidemic levels. I know Alex mentioned the U.S. Surgeon General issuing an advisory estimating that some of the youth e-cigarette rates have increased 90-some% depending on the age and the grade. So some of the statistics that we have are outdated, and even much higher rates we're seeing are youth smoking or using these products. We have asked the FDA to take action on e-cigarettes for a very long time, and they have not exercised their authority to regulate these products as we would like them to. So we do really are trying to put a lot of pressure on them to do more. They've made a lot of great comments and great steps, showing positive steps towards controlling the epidemic, but really I would say don't hold your breath. Sometimes it can take many, many years. We're still waiting for graphic warning labels that was supposed to happen years ago. And will be happening due to lawsuits. So FDA, well, it's great that they are in the news more and they're trying to claim that they are cracking down. We really do need to see more action on their part. It really is an epidemic. And many youth don't even realize how much harm that they are doing. I know I've also heard stories and seen stories of teens who are addicted and recognize that now and can't stop. And they're really struggling with that chemical dependency. Can e-cigarettes help somebody quit? And we've talked about this, so no e-cigarette has been found safe and effective to help somebody quit smoking using other tobacco products. We would first and foremost recommend an FDA-approved method, so that would be things like nicotine replacement therapies, patches, gum, lozenges, some of those medications, you might hear Chantix, Bread and Clean. So we would first and foremost recommend using one of those. And that's for a variety of reasons. It's because these are not regulated products, it's very hard to know exactly how much nicotine you're getting. So when somebody is trying to maybe reduce their nicotine use, it's really hard to know exactly what they're getting. And of course, compared to breathing clean air, these products are harmful and they do cause lung damage. The Minnesota Department of Health has also created some slides that can be useful in schools to educate parents. So I wanted to include some of these slides. So some of these next slides come directly from the Minnesota Department of Health. Some quick statistics and easy to understand graphics, really just to continue to drive that message that we've been talking about tonight. So nicotine harms the development of your brain as a teen grows. It has negative implications for learning, memory, attention span. That brain is still developing till about age 25. And the nicotine exposure can actually change that brain chemistry. The earlier the exposure, the greater the risk, making the youth more susceptible for a lifelong addiction. And it can happen quickly. So even if somebody is maybe thinking, oh, my friends all use it, I want to just try it, it smells like fruit, it's not going to be that bad, I might just try it once. Addiction can happen very quickly. A few days or weeks from initiation, somebody can be addicted. There's an increased risk of addiction to tobacco, drugs, alcohol, other drugs, other products. And a really scary statistics that we're also seeing that also is probably lower than the actual snapshot if you would take it today. 1/3 of high school e-cigarette users report having used their vaping device for recreational marijuana. That is a huge amount. That is a lot. So kids are very crafty, very creative, as we talked about with the hooded sweatshirt and the vaporware and how they sometimes can hide these products. Juul pods, they're supposed to be a closed system. They're supposed to be, you use it once and then it's done, you throw it away. But just go on YouTube and search how to refill your Juul pod and you can do it. So kids are putting other chemicals, marijuana, oils, other products into their vaping devices and using them recreationally. So why is that an issue? I just have a little information on, similar to nicotine, but the effects of marijuana in the teen brain. So teen brains are not fully developed till about the age 25 or so, mid-20s. Research shows that marijuana can have permanent effects on the developing brain, similar to nicotine, especially with regular or heavy use, which is definitely what we're seeing with these e-cigarettes and these products. A frequent or long-term marijuana use is linked to school dropout and lower educational achievement. I don't think any of this is surprising to any of us. So negative effects of marijuana, the physical effects, difficulty thinking and problem solving, as I mentioned, similar to the nicotine, the learning, memory, attention span can be impaired, impaired coordination, difficulty maintaining attention. Negative effects on school and social life as well, so decline in school performance, naturally that comes along with some of the use of marijuana, increased risk of mental health issues, impaired driving, that potential for addiction again. Youth who use e-cigarettes, as I've mentioned multiple times, twice as likely to smoke, use combustible tobacco products as well. That can be even up to 4 times. We're seeing some new data come out to show that. And the advertising, as I've mentioned, it has already been out there. The damage is kind of already done on social media. Majority of Minnesota high school students have seen ads for e-cigarettes, and if you haven't seen them, it's probably because you're not the target. They really are everywhere on social media, online. It's very easy to find. And then here's just an image from Juul. This was before they took down some of their images using some of the youth, so you can kind of see how some of these maybe are geared more towards our youth instead of an adult population. New technologies reveal new risks. So the high concentration of nicotine we talked about with the free-base nicotine versus the nicotine salts allows for that very high concentration of nicotine. The fruit and other flavors that these products come in, I don't think grandma's going to the store to buy cotton candy to try to quit smoking. It's really something that is designed for our kids. And I don't want to be a complete Debbie Downer today and scare you and talk about all the risks. What are some things that we can do then? What do we do moving forward? Some recommendations for parents. So a great first step is learning about this. So by being here tonight, educating yourselves, learning about some of these products, that is a great first step. Learning about some of the facts on the risks that they pose for our youth is very important. I would also encourage you to talk to your kids about it. Really set a firm expectation that your house is tobacco-free, and then be that example yourself. Be tobacco-free yourself, but definitely have a conversation. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they do have a great website, and I have some handouts from them as well. It's just some basic talking points on how to bring this up with your youth and how to talk about it. I would also just encourage you to think that nobody is exempt from this. I do even have a colleague who works in tobacco control and was looking through her daughter's backpack one day and found an e-cigarette. So it's something that happens everywhere. We know that virtually every school in Minnesota is struggling with this epidemic. Nobody is exempt from it, nobody is too good for it, or it's not going to happen in their community, it's not going to happen in their home. So just want to put out that word of caution that it is still important to talk about. Even if you're confident your kid is not using e-cigarettes, that is great. Continue to have that conversation and continue to be educated on the different types of products that are out there. You can also find some excellent resources from the Minnesota Department of Health. They have a specific page dedicated for e-cigarettes. They also have an e-cigarette toolkit. So it has some great resources on, specifically for schools, but also for parents, on curriculum, educational materials, different resources that you can trust and that you can go to for more information on all of this. Recommendations for school staff as well. I always like to talk about this. So similar to the parents, really learning the risks of e-cigarette, the different types of products, educating yourself is a great first step. Developing, implementing, and enforcing tobacco-free school policies. So making sure that your school has a comprehensive tobacco policy is very important. And by comprehensive, I mean that it covers all products, all the time, on all locations. So depending on the type of school, resources from the Public Health Law Center, which is one of our partners, they have information on what state law says can and can't be allowed in schools. Basically, it's good to review and look at your school's policy because sometimes the law only covers the indoor areas. It might not cover all areas of the property all the time. So really reviewing, looking at that is important. Also very good to be aware that there are some programs out there that Big Tobacco is marketing to schools or trying to get schools to participate in. It seems very good intentioned, but coming from the tobacco industry, we know that there is a different motive behind that. So some smoke-free programs, we want to see a smoke-free generation. They might approach a school, and this has happened in Minnesota, they might approach a school saying, hey, here's our curriculum, we'll give it to you, use it, we don't want kids to smoke as well. Those programs have been tested and they are not effective in stopping youth e-cigarette use, youth tobacco use. So word of warning, we would recommend using a credible resource that we know has been reviewed and tested, and just good to be aware that Big Tobacco is sneaky and they're trying to get out there and put these programs in schools that actually don't really have an effect on youth tobacco use. And again, Minnesota Department of Health has a lot of great resources specific for school staff that you can go and look at. It is also important that communities can take some action. So just in general, some main points looking at Minnesota specifically in our state. Over half the state is covered by clean indoor air laws restricting e-cigarette use indoors. It's about 52%. I know that this current legislative session has been pretty active. We've seen a few different tobacco control policy language come up. One of them is including e-cigarettes in our clean indoor air laws, which they currently are not. So the great thing in our state is that we can go further than what the state law says. And by that I mean local communities, cities, counties, they can implement restrictions and they can implement laws that go beyond what the state law says. We're very fortunate in our state to have that. We don't have preemption, which some states struggle with, which sets the baseline at whatever the state level says, that's what has to go everywhere in the state. Some communities are limiting sales of flavored tobacco products, so maybe you've heard this: Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth. There's a lot of local action happening to really restrict the flavors. And the reason why I bring this up too is one proven method to really decrease the youth tobacco use and the epidemic is by enacting these types of policies. We know that it works. So really encouraging communities to think about their current tobacco policies, their flavor restrictions. Also, Tobacco 21 is something that you might have heard recently in the news. 31 communities to date have raised the minimum age to buy tobacco from 18 to 21. So some of those are counties, most of them are cities, but that is a huge amount. And we do know, looking back at our history from about 10 years ago or so, that when the Freedom to Breathe Act was happening, we do know that local action is really what drives that state action. So we encourage local communities not to wait and see what the state does. It's actually the opposite. The state looks at what are our local communities doing, and then we implement, in Minnesota at least, state laws. And then, of course, another big piece is increasing funding for comprehensive tobacco prevention and control. So in our state, we do have a funded quit line. It was funded through master settlement, or tobacco settlement agreement dollars, and that actually is set to go away next year. So there's current language in the omnibus bill and in the governor's budget to get a quit line back to our state. That's going to be through the Minnesota Department of Health. So that is excellent news for us. Otherwise, we would have been the only state without a quit line, which would not be good. And I'll go over and I'll talk about what resources are available for youth with the quit line and other tobacco dependence treatment resources. The American Lung Association does also have some guidance on our website, lung.org, on tobacco-free schools and really thinking about steps that we can take locally in our schools and our communities to address the youth epidemic. So tobacco-free spaces are a proven way to prevent youth tobacco use. They protect students, staff, visitors, everybody from the harms of secondhand smoke, secondhand vapor. Tobacco-free schools is one way to address the increasing popularity of e-cigarettes, so really creating a healthy environment, a healthy community, making that the norm instead of the norm of using e-cigarettes that maybe some of our youth perceive. So what actually is available as far as cessation or tobacco dependence treatment goes? I'll quick mention a couple of resources, but I do also have a handout that is specific for youth if you're curious to pick that up. Stop by the resource table. The American Lung Association, we do have a quit smoking program. It's called Freedom from Smoking. It's available in a few different forms. There's an online version, so if somebody likes to go online and really work at their own pace, they can go and check that out online. We do have in-person clinics. We don't host those on a regular basis ourselves. What we do at the Lung Association is we train facilitators to go back to your own community and host these clinics. So if people really enjoy the supportive environment of group clinics, that's something that might be appealing. We do also have a self-help guide, so it's just a paper copy if you really like to actually physically hold something in your hands. We do also have the Lung Helpline and Tobacco Quit Line. This exists for any question lung health whatsoever. So if your child has asthma, or your brother has COPD, or your child is using a Juul and you just have a question on something that's going on with the lung health, you can call and get an answer. So the people who pick up on the other end are registered nurses, respiratory therapists, certified tobacco treatment specialists. They're health professionals that are prepared to answer questions or get you connected to the right resources that you're looking for. It is also a tobacco quit line, so if you maybe are not ready to quit, or you're thinking about it, just have a question about something, or you have a question about your youth quitting, you can call and talk to somebody and get an answer or get connected to the right resource. We do have some specific programs designed specifically for youth, so they're called Not on Tobacco or Teens Against Tobacco Use, or TATTOO. We are currently developing and working to roll out some updated information that specifically addresses electronic cigarettes, e-cigarette use in our youth. So more to come on that. We don't have it active in Minnesota right now, but it is something that we are working on, because we do know that the basic addiction model, the basic information that is with our Freedom from Smoking program, it doesn't always apply to our youth who are using e-cigarettes. There really needs to be more that needs to be done. So more is happening. And with our state then in Minnesota, locally we do have Quit Plan services. They are an excellent resource. Their website, their phone number is up here. They have a lot of different support that somebody can use when they're working on addressing their tobacco use. So they have a helpline, they have quit coaches you can talk to 24/7. So if you're having a craving in the middle of the night and you really want to talk to somebody, you can call and talk to a quit coach. And this is free for all Minnesotans. It does focus on the uninsured and the underinsured. So if you call in and you maybe have coverage through your insurance plan, that's okay. They will still get you connected to your correct place that you need to go. So when in doubt, you can always call Quit Plan Services and they'll get you taken care of. They do have a free starter kit with patches, gum, and lozenges. They have quick guide, text message, email program. And then specific for our youth then, what is available? So unfortunately, youth would not be able to get the starter kit with the nicotine replacement therapies. Anyone under 18, they are not able to give that out. But they can order the quick guide, they can get support with an email program, they can even potentially talk with a quick coach who is trained and can help talk through some of these issues and questions that they might be having. So I definitely would encourage, if there's ever a question, you're not sure if your youth would be covered or what is available to them, always call and ask. It's just that they won't be able to have the nicotine replacement therapy or the texting program. And then, as I mentioned, this is the handout, so you can look for it, what's available for our youth. So it talks about Quit Plan services. Another great resource is teen.smokefree.gov. So they do have a text messaging program really geared towards the youth population who maybe they're always on their phones. They really probably learn better through that type of help or that type of method. There's a mobile app that they can download and get support. Live help, online chat, health plans as well. Always call the number on the back of your insurance card. You never know what could be available specifically for youth. So I would encourage you to pursue that or think about that as well. Another program is the Become an X program, becomeanx.org. It's a specific quit vaping texting program. So youth can text in, and maybe they're one of those youth who is realizing that they are addicted and they want to do something about it, but they're not sure how, they're not sure where to start, or if they can even do anything. They can text in and they can get information, resources on how to start their quit journey and really address their tobacco use. And I know that we're going to have time for the panel and for questions, so I want to be mindful of that. But if there is anything right now that anybody does have specifically on something that I talked about or that I said, or that you're really a burning question you're really wanting to ask me, I want to just leave a minute or two, see if anybody does have any questions right now. Sure.
Me?
Yeah, go ahead.
How long does it take for that quit plan kit to come to the house? Because some people, if they're going to have surgery, they need to quit quick, or there's reasons that they need to be quitting quickly, and do you know how long it takes?
Yeah, good question. I'm not entirely sure the business days that they quote right now on how long to get that out, but that is definitely something that if somebody calls in and is working with a quit coach, they can mention that. And then the quit coach can either work to get it to them quickly, or they can talk about some other avenues that might be available. So one thing too that is available in Minnesota is through Minnesota Care Medical Assistance, over-the-counter nicotine replacement therapies, so patches, gum, lozenges, are covered for free through those programs with a prescription, and they don't have to go see a doctor to get that. Anybody could, on Minnesota Care, Medicare, they could walk into a pharmacy and ask the pharmacist to prescribe them an over-the-counter medication, and then it will be covered through that plan. So there might be different avenues depending on the coverage that the person has that can be explored. So pharmacists do have prescribing authority, so that's very good to know for those who maybe that barrier is actually getting to the doctor or getting their medications. Yeah, good question. Sure.
My question is, you mentioned a couple times that students or youth who are using e-cigs are going to go on to use regular cigarettes. I'm curious where that's coming from, because it's the flavors that are getting them attracted. It's just because it's going to be cheaper for them, or why do you think that they moved to regular cigarettes?
Yeah, so the question was, why do we think that youth are maybe going to move on to use combustible tobacco products and regular cigarettes, the 2 times as likely or 4 times as likely that I was mentioning? It could be for a variety of reasons. Youth who maybe use e-cigarettes, we're not sure if e-cigarettes weren't an option, maybe they wouldn't have ever picked up a tobacco product, but since they did pick up an e-cigarette, they might think that it's just maybe cheaper, maybe where they are, maybe they ran out of e-juice, or maybe they try a cigarette.
So they gotta find something.
Nicotine is the main thing there, so really the addiction component. That nicotine is so addicting. And kind of to put it in perspective a little bit, how nicotine works in the brain, I'm going to compare it to a couple other illicit drugs. So cocaine and heroin. Cocaine and heroin only affect a couple different receptors in the brain. I don't have a slide on this, but nicotine virtually affects all of them, so it is even more addictive than things like cocaine and heroin. So yeah, it's the addiction piece, the addiction component. We do also see with adults who are working on a legitimate quit attempt and maybe are using e-cigarettes as a method to quit, which we know is not proven an effective method or safe method. But sometimes they do actually end up becoming dual users, so using both products, both the e-cigarettes and combustible cigarettes. Good question.
How much do those dual pods typically cost?
The question was, how much did Juul pods typically cost? It can vary. I can tell you when I went to go to a tobacco shop to purchase the samples that I have, on the door they just had printed out $15 off your starter kit or $20 off. I didn't have to ask for anything, I didn't have to do anything. It was just a promotion that they were running. So it can vary. I did buy a Sorin device and a Juul for, it was about $60, I think. And so the pods, it can kind of vary. Another thing to be aware of as well as far as pricing with these products is that if you go to Juul's website, you can sign up for a monthly subscription and you get a discount by doing that. So like your monthly box, your monthly, there's a lot of different monthly subscriptions out there. So you can get a discount if you sign up to have that reoccurring. Sure.
How fast can they smoke one of those, like bathroom break or,
Yeah, good question. The question is how fast can you vape or smoke one of those products? It can be done in seconds. You can activate the device by simply putting it up to your lips and going. So walking to and from class, in the bathroom really quickly. Sometimes, maybe not so much with the Juul or the Sorin, but we've seen people with like lanyards around their neck with their e-cigarette hanging from it, so they can walk around all day hands-free, take a quick puff, and then keep going on their day. Yeah, and even with the tank devices too, sometimes I know I've noticed like coming in and out of a building, somebody quick takes a hit on their vape and then walks in the building or walks out and quick does it, so it's very quick. And it doesn't have to, it doesn't always produce such a large cloud that would be very obvious, so you could kind of puff it into your sleeve, or we've heard, hold your breath a little bit, it just kind of dissipates, so it can be hard to detect and it can be very quick to use. Sure.
I also heard recently that certain devices have exploded and burned kids? How'd that happen?
Yeah, the question was about exploding devices or burning, and thank you for bringing that up. I did not mention that. Yes, there is a fire risk associated with these devices. So with charging them with the batteries, so basic anatomy of an e-cigarette is that there's a battery that heats the liquid that produces an aerosol. So sometimes these batteries can explode, causing damage. I know less than a year ago, a man in Florida actually did die from an e-cigarette exploding in his face. I think that was maybe the first death that we had heard of, but it does happen. Another risk with these products too that we're hearing from a lot of our medical professionals and our healthcare partners is young infants and kids coming in with nicotine burns. Maybe the mom is filling her e-cig with the infant on her lap or on her hip and accidentally spills some, and it does cause a chemical burn. Nicotine is a poison, and we've even heard from school staff who maybe have confiscated a device, accidentally getting some nicotine leaking into their skin and experiencing nicotine poisoning and having to go to the hospital. So these devices are definitely not safe for a variety of reasons.
To add to that, some of the charging is not being charged appropriately, and that's why their electrical systems are included. So they're trying to find that whoever's got a charger, and it might not fit with their budget or their system, and that's why.
Right, that charging piece, and again, that kind of shows the addiction component, that they're so desperate maybe to get their charge for their device. Yeah?
So is there a place that parents confiscate these, that they can get rid of them safely?
That is an excellent question, and that is something that we are still working on trying to get a good answer to. Depending on the county and the city and what's going on, I know some school resource officers confiscate them and might have a way that they're trying to dispose of them, but yeah, that poses an environmental risk as well. We know that a lot of these devices are being confiscated every day, sometimes in school many a day. So it's kind of, maybe school staff has a large stockpile, they're not sure how they safely expose them. It depends on the school, I'm not sure, maybe sometimes we would hope that they don't go back to the parents or go back to the kids, but sometimes we've heard that they're being used as educational pieces then, so having parent education nights and having an array of products that have been confiscated. But as far as the disposal goes, that's a great question, something that environmentally definitely needs to be addressed. Yeah.
Yeah, Heidi, I would encourage you, if you ever need another device, that you don't go buy one, you just come stop at the school.
Right.
And we'll look you up with the few that we confiscated.
Oh, yes.
Some parents though who like their kids stole theirs or took their own and then they're like, don't you dare take that, I'm coming to pick it up because they're expensive. And so that just leads to some more like that idea of role modeling and
Yeah.
parents are gonna fight to get it back.
Yeah, and I will mention too, and then we'll move on to our panel and kind of say some of your questions, but we really do recommend as well thinking about school policy and tobacco policy and how to handle violations. We do recommend more of a tiered approach, and first of all, not giving the device back to the parent or the child, or even if the parent claims, oh, it's my device, well, that's too bad, so sad. But we do recommend maybe a tiered approach to the violations and giving kids a chance other than just a 1 strike or 2 strike and you're suspended. Really, the issue is big tobacco, how they've marketed to our kids. That's really where the responsibility lies. And we do know that our kids are struggling with nicotine addiction, so instead of maybe expelling them or suspending them for a violation for a tobacco product, that could have unintended consequences. It could set them up maybe for a life in the criminal justice system later on. So we would recommend education, talking with maybe a dedicated school counselor, for example, or staff, and having a conversation, having an educational program that the youth could go to. So really having multiple steps and multiple chances for education in place before going to a suspension. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pause and we're going to switch over to the panel and definitely keep your questions coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi and Alex. Let's give them a round of applause.
And actually, before we transition, there's actually, believe it or not, 3 more parts to this. They're shorter parts before we get to the panel. So we've got Detective Dickman will give you just a little bit of an overview of other chemicals and controlled substances we're seeing at the school level. And Greg Cole, who's the principal of Compass Programs, will give you a little bit of a district perspective, a very short perspective of school district discipline, and then I'll wrap it up just real quickly with some of our school level resources, or what you can do as a parent or guardian. Keep in mind that if you have a note card, please write additional questions down on that note card for our panel discussion. At this time, I'd like to introduce Detective Dickman, Brooklyn Park Police Department. Detective Dickman.
All right, I'm Detective Dickman. I'm the school resource officer up at Champlain Park High School. It's my 4th year up there. I've got some slides on what I'm seeing as far as different types of stuff we see in the school. Some of it will be a little redundant, so we'll fly through it pretty quick and look at the panel. E-cigarettes. It is illegal to possess as a minor. There is state statute saying they can't possess an electronic delivery device. That's where we hang our hat on. Also, if they have an e-cigarette and the e-juice that does not have any nicotine in it, you can still do the e-cigarette part of it. Also, the e-cig with nicotine in itself is a separate violation. That's usually what we kind of hang our hats on, and that's kind of where we really go forward from there as far as state statutes. It's called vaping or chucking clouds. Biggest thing I tell you these things is when you're looking at your kid's phone, social media, you hear them talking on the phone, whatever, and you're catching chucking clouds. Well, what are you talking about? They're talking about vaping. It does have a sweeter smell. It does make it a lot harder because it's not like marijuana or cigarettes where a kid comes in before school, checks in because he's late because he's out smoking marijuana in his car, and the secretary goes, "You smell like marijuana, get in the office," and you search and find marijuana. This makes it much, much, much harder to detect and find. Stuff Ariel talked about, the jewels, teardrops, they're just very discreet items. It looks like a USB. I had a teacher actually come up and give me this one. He said, "Hey, I think I found some kid's cell phone charger." I said, "Cool, what's these things?" And she had no idea. So, I mean, even teachers and staff are not up to speed because it is so dynamic. It's constantly changing. It's even hard for us to keep up. Like she even said, the jewels, it was cool for like a week and now it's not. And that's just how it works with kids and social media. So this is the highly concentrated marijuana that they are seeing in the e-cigs. This stuff is very, very potent. I'm having kids tell me they take one hit and they're good for a long time, as opposed to smoking a lot of marijuana. Dabs, wax, hash oil, they're typically anywhere from 70 to 90% THC. A normal marijuana cigarette, 5, maybe 10 if you have some really good weed. So they're just, it's so much more potent. It's kind of like the drug side of the jewels with the high nicotine when they get nic sick, stuff like that. I got some more on that next. So kind of transitioning to marijuana. Again, some terminology I'm seeing and I hear, marijuana is called loud. We're seeing a lot of kids transition from marijuana to the e-cig with the THC oil, which is why I talk a little bit about marijuana, because it is kind of a transition into that because it's easy, it's quicker to get, you don't have to smoke as much, and it's not as detectable. But loud, I don't know why. Atlanta is the best I can determine. Is there's some stuff down in Atlanta where people call them loud as very high quality marijuana, and then it just kind of disseminated throughout the country. It's just marijuana in general. Link match, kind of let's meet up and do it. That's kind of become more universal outside of just drugs now, even for like fighting this link let's match. But it did originally kind of start for marijuana. 420, I don't know, someone made it up and said it was LAPD code for marijuana. It's not. So I don't know where they came up with that. April 20th has then kind of been dubbed Weed Day. Also, it is the anniversary of Columbine, but this was kind of before that. Some people think that that's why Columbine had that day, some don't. We can't really prove it one way or another. Blunt wax. Blunt is just like a big, like backwoods cigarettes, or Swisher Sweets, they hollow those up, so it's just a really big marijuana cigarette in layman's terms. Wax and wax sticks, again, is that highly concentrated THC, which we are now seeing to be able to purchase through the e-cigarette oil to go right into the e-cigarette. They don't have to open it, it comes just right in the packaging. Gas and chief, I don't know, that's what the kids tell me, I don't know why. I can't, I wish I had a great explanation on it, I just don't. But stuff we are hearing, just some fun pictures of pipes and bongs and stuff like that. We could all pretty much say this stuff is, we found it in a room or a car, say this is not normal. Grinders, they use it to grind up the weed, smoke easier. Small scales, that's probably, I mean, it's only about that big. So they're pretty small. You usually use that on street level sales. So someone weighs it quick if they're buying street level marijuana. There's the blunts I was talking about. Backwoods, again, honeyberry, all the flavors of the world. Again, grandma's not going to quit smoking because of cotton candy, it's kids. So it's all targeted towards kids. Dugouts, we're not going to get into some stuff real quick here on hiding it, right? Kids are going to hide it. They don't want you to know what's going on. If we're paying attention and maybe do room checks every once in a while, they know it. Dugouts, I mean, you can put your little marijuana in there, hide that little one hitter in there, and it just looks like a wooden box, you know, without really opening or smelling it. You might not know what it is. Cell phone case, kind of the same thing, just looks like a newer cell phone, ibuprofen bottle. Again, this is why we really encourage parents to lock up all the medications, even over-the-counter ones, because if we see a bottle of ibuprofen sitting in the kid's room for 3 weeks and he's never complained of pain or headaches or anything like that, kind of a clue. Same thing, they like to use mason jars or old prescription pills or bottles. Just seals real nice and kind of doesn't smell as much. I've seen, this isn't from the school, but I've seen a kid with a mason jar with about that much marijuana in it. But again, it sealed it up real nice. Couldn't really smell it. Someone just told us he had it and we got lucky. Same thing, WD-40 cans. I mean, this is all stuff you can find online and Google and buy. They're just fake bottoms. They can hollow it out and screw that off and hide their stuff in there. So again, you see a Coke can sitting in your kid's nightstand for 3 weeks. Why is he still drinking that same Coke can? Be a little suspicious as parents, especially if you're already thinking that, take it a little bit farther. You already had that suspicion, dig a little deeper and check that stuff out. This was a fun one, like George and I actually dealt with. Kid actually hollowed out a deodorant stick and put it in his marijuana there because that deodorant still had a little bit of fresh smell, and you get like 40 minutes of frustration. So we finally realized he had 2 deodorant sticks, one he used and one he hid his marijuana in, and finally found it. Social media, right? I mean, no one goes up to the street corner in a hooded sweatshirt and says, "Cool, thanks," and walk off, right? Especially in a high school. It's all done through social media. Again, remember, loud, marijuana, right? Who needs loud? This kid is selling marijuana at the school. He is not there anymore. And emojis, right? I mean, kids talk in emojis, right? I mean, we're going back to Egyptian times with hieroglyphs. Something with a smoke, fire, gas. Remember, gas is marijuana. I don't know, maybe this is where it originated from. Something with green leaf, right? Let's burn, smoke, green, marijuana. And it's just as simple as that. Snapchat is what we mostly see at Champlin Park, then kind of maybe Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Facebook kind of seems to be fading out, but again, Snapchat's the biggest one because it goes away. Again, he puts this on his story for 3 hours, a bunch of kids see it, they hit him up, they meet him in the bathroom, they do the deal, and they're off to the races. The biggest thing I want to what you take away from this as far as loud and emojis is Urban Dictionary. It is an app, it is free, download it. Right? You're going to see some very inappropriate things on it, but if you're going through your kid's phone, you're hearing your kid talking, he's talking about, you know, something loud, and it doesn't make sense in the context of what he's talking about. Throw it in Urban Dictionary and it's going to tell you what it is. I use it all the time. I mean, that's where I came up with most of this stuff outside of the kids telling me. You're looking through your kid's phone, anything, you're seeing emojis, you're seeing stuff that just doesn't make sense, and trust me, I've seen these kids' phones, it makes no sense to me, right? Throw it in Urban Dictionary, throw a few of the words in there, and you're going to get context on what they're talking about. That way you can have that honest conversation with your kid and not feel like you're in the dark and they're just running circles around you, confusing you, and give up. So, huge, huge resource, one of my favorites. Again, just more stuff that they hide it in. You don't really see a whole lot of alcohol. Weekend adventure for kids is what I'm kind of hearing and seeing. Parents are out of town, have a bunch of kids over to a house, stuff like that. So obviously if kids are going to a party, verify parents are home, because if they're not, probably drinking. Again, kind of like a body spray, suntan oil bottles. I mean, they're just, you buy them online, they come empty, and you just pour alcohol in it, and you never know, right? So I mean, December 31st, and he's got 3 of these in his room. Is he really needing suntan lotion? Probably not. Same thing. He smells like a hockey gym bag. Is he really using this? No. Digital camera, seriously, if you guys have a digital camera?
Be suspicious.
All right, moving on. Vodka's kind of typical. We do see, again, it's clear, it's easy to hide. You can put it with almost anything if they're desperate. Myth is you can't smell vodka in your breath. You can. We've had kids come into school and they're stumbling. You can still smell the vodka. It's a grain alcohol. You still smell the alcohol. Flavored vodkas, again, all the flavors of the world. UV is a big one. Smirnoff, Absolute. They have peach, watermelon. I mean, you name it, they have it. Candy, chocolate cake. I mean, it's insane. So those are just easy. They don't have quite the bite of a 12-year-old scotch the kid's gonna drink. Right? It's just easier for them. Lean or purple drink. Right? We've had a couple kids years ago with this stuff. Basically, what they do is they take cough syrup that has this in it. They mix it with Sprite and a Jolly Rancher, and they get purple drink, and it messes you up. We had 3-4 years ago, kids were skipping school. They went on the Cub, stole cough syrup, stole the wrong one that didn't have this. Tried mixing it, didn't get their high, went back in, stole the right cough syrup. Mixed it with this stuff, and then went knocking on doors, and people thought they were trying to break in, and we caught them and then realized what they were doing. But it gives you a different type of drunk or high. Prescription pills, we hear and see a lot of it. Again, it's like e-cig. It doesn't smell, it's concealed. I mean, I could have 15 Vicodin in my pocket right now, you have no idea. Right? I can go in the bathroom, sell 2, and there it is. So the biggest thing is, lock them up. You can just slide on the next, but lock up your pills, count them, right? There it is. See, they have different things you can buy online. I mean, so if you just had a surgery, doctors prescribe more pills than you need because they don't want you coming back. So we'll just give you 30 when 20 will do. So then you have those extra pills lying around because we're all responsible adults, we don't need them anymore. I mean, I just had a nose surgery in February at a deviated septum fix, and I still have 20 Vicodin, 5 Percocet, and 5 Oxy in my house. I know, right? Well, yeah. You just gotta go back in and complain that you're in a lot of pain to give it to you. And that's the other thing. You go in acting like you're in pain, and with the recent surgery, there you go. So lock them up. Back one. One more. Oh, there. Okay. These are the big ones we see. Xanax. We do see a fair amount of Adderall and stuff like that too. Bars or Xanax bars. These ones are kind of common because you can come into 4s. Typically, they're each a 25-gram section, so 2 gram or 2 milligram total. And what you will see sometimes, this is the best picture I could find. I wish I could find a better one. Right down here, you can see like a white little powder in there. You put a Xanax in there, and it's kind of like that lean or purple drink. Now you can drink it. It's disintegrated in a soda. Again, Jones cream soda, sweeter. They drink it, they get the same effect as taking it. It just kind of gets in the system, they do a little quicker. So stuff to keep an eye out for too. Just some quick resources. She had way more, so use hers. And I think that's it for me. Biggest thing I want you guys to take away from it is that Urban Dictionary. If you have suspicions for a reason. You guys have every right to go in and check your parent or your kids' backpacks, your kids' rooms, anything like that. I've had parents before say, "Well, they said I can't check my room." You're the parents. You're in control, check the room, right? If you do find stuff, you can always call the police and we can come out. It doesn't necessarily mean your kid's gonna get charged. We do leave a lot of that discretion to you, so if you find a bunch of marijuana and say, I don't want this in my house, we can come out, we can take it for you. If you want your kid cited for it, we can write a citation, and if you're like, you know what, this is his first time, we're gonna have a good home talk about this. A lot of times we go with that too. Realistically, with juvenile courts in Hennepin County, they're so overwhelmed. Probably a better punishment for the first time offense. So we're as willing to work with you as you are with us. So.
I have a question for you.
One question, and then he's going to yell at me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You didn't mention THC infused gummies. Are you not seeing those in your school?
Not yet. I thought I had a slide on that. I know we did some last minute quick changes.
We have had them in our district. We have had them in other schools, yeah.
Okay, so there's one, the THC Oil, we're seeing again, they're called carts, CRT for cartridges. They're one-time uses. We've had a handful in the school. You can order them online. That's as easy as that, because they're legal in Colorado, Seattle, all that stuff. They order them, they get shipped, and they come in, again, they're that wax, that highly concentrated 95% THC. So that's another one to keep an ear out for is carts. And again, you'll see the same thing. They take one big hit, they can get really sick from it if they're not used to smoking marijuana. I've had a couple kids where they've done it, they've never really smoked marijuana, their buddy said, hey, hit this quick, and they do, and then they're in the nurse's office. So, I have not seen the gummies, but it sounds like a couple times. So.
I just want to mention too on the wax and the dabs that a lot of people don't realize that it's a felony to have those.
Correct. So because of the highly concentrated and being on school property also bumps up that felony level too. So I'm going to pass it over, save your questions for the panel, and we'll keep moving on.
Thank you, Detective Dickman, I appreciate it. So I've just got a real brief thing, and you're doing this already, but here's just a few things that you can do. I try to sum this up sort of in this in a statement in terms of being in the know, being informed. That's not a destination you arrive at; it's a manner of travel. Okay, and things are regularly changing faster than we can keep up with them, right? And so being here tonight is really great, and then when you leave, something new is going to happen tomorrow, right? And so being educated yourself, but sharing that information with others is really important. So, educate yourself. Being here today is an important part in that step, right? Use this information to share with your children and your neighbors. At the end of the day, this is a community-wide effort, right? If one home on the block is looking for stuff, that's not as powerful as all of the homes on your block, right? But if nobody's looking for it, that's a challenge, right? Talk early and often. Again, early intervention is important, and you as the parents still statistically have the most influence on whether or not your child is going to choose to use or not use, okay? Get to know your child, and get to know your child's friends. This is a real one that hits home for me. When I was a 24-year-old parent of teenagers, my parents always made sure that when I was going to someone's house, they're like, you're going to sleep over at someone's, I'm going to call them. And I was like, oh, I never appreciate it. And then very soon after that, as a 24-year-old parent of teenagers, right, I was doing the same thing. But what I didn't know was when I was actually talking to the parent that they were a cocaine addict. They didn't volunteer that information for me, right? And so while I talked to the parent, they weren't telling me that the kids were snorting lines with her over the weekend, okay? And so don't just know the parent on the other line, get to know the parent. In fact, you have much more opportunity now if you're connected in social media to get to know people, right? I think my wife calls it creeping on people on social media. I don't do that because I stay away from social media. But creep on people, that's the right way to, is that the right lingo? I think that is, right? My wife, I said that she's buying something on Craigslist or something. I was creeping on, they seem okay. Okay, all right. Partner and collaborate with other parents. You're here creating connections. You have hopefully lots of connections with parents in your community and in your school. And together, again, this is as a community-wide effort. Monitor and guide. Again, it's really important that, be suspicious of things. Certainly don't indict without information, but be questioning things regularly. And when you're questioning something, it doesn't mean you have to question your child about it. Be thinking about it. If you hear something that sounds strange, if it doesn't seem like it fits in the context of a conversation, use that Urban Dictionary app, right? Think back to some of these resources, and then put yourself in a position to be able to ask thought-provoking questions, right? None of us, there's a fine line between asking questions and questioning someone, right? And which one do you actually get the answer you're looking for when you're asking questions or when you're questioning someone, right? It's a very delicate balance. But you are the parent, right? And so you have the ability and the right and the responsibility to question your child if you want, while also asking them questions. And that's, again, as a parent, I think I'm a pretty proficient principal of one of the largest schools in the state of Minnesota. There's 652 cities in the state of Minnesota that are smaller than Champlain Park High School. Okay? I mean, there's 850 registered cities in the state of Minnesota. We operate larger than 650 of them every day. I go home to 4 kids, and I most of the time feel like a traitor, right? And so parenting is really tough. The most difficult conversations I have with my kids are typically around their cell phone, right? And the things that are going on. And so know that you're not alone in that, okay? Know that you have resources. If you have concerns, feel free to contact school staff, right? School nurses, social workers, school counselors if you're at the high school or middle school level. Certainly we have staff here at the district office. We are really passionate about helping our youth be successful, right? And at the end of the day, our kids are engaging in things that they don't actually know the end results of, right? Because we don't fully understand the impacts of all of the things that our kids are doing yet, right? And that's sort of that challenge our kids are living in nowadays, is that society of immediacy, right? Instant gratification, right? And so work with us, and we will work with you. We've got great partners here as well that are here to support you in the work. And quite frankly, Minnesota Adult Teen Challenge, you know the truth, would love to be out of business, because it means they wouldn't be serving people who are recovering, right? Okay, and so they're here to help us work with our families. Lastly this evening, before we get to our panel, I just want to introduce Greg Cole. He is the principal of Compass Programs, and that's a really large job. Okay, so Compass Programs is a specialized school in our district, but Greg also works with students and families who are expelled because of discipline reasons. And when somebody has a question in any of our schools, the 30-something plus schools in our district around discipline, this is the guy they call. And so when he says, well, maybe Champlain Park has never dealt with gummies, you know, schools A, B, C, and D have dealt with gummies, this is the guy. And so he's here just to sort of share with you a district overview, sort of on the things that he works with on a daily basis and the implications of discipline and chemical use. And then we'll get to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you. So I can go over all our policies and consequences and all those sorts of things, but I think I got a question for you. Raise your hand if you have a bad kid. Really, not one of you has a bad kid. Oh.
Different district.
Okay. How about if you're a bad parent? Any bad parents in here? Okay. So why did I ask those two questions? Well, there's sort of a myth that exists, I think, that there's this pool of bad kids, right? And then there's the pool of good kids. And the bad kids use drugs, or e-cigarettes, or various devices, and the good kids don't, right? And then as a parent, if you learn that your child is doing one of these things, well, now I've entered into the bad parent role with my bad kid, right? That is all false. So let me tell you who I meet, because the number one reason that a student would probably get to me, it has to do with chemicals or controlled substances, okay? The profile of most of the students that I meet, they're mostly boys, okay? And there's a lot of speculation and reasons and ideas about why that is, but that's the truth. It's mostly boys, probably from the age of 14 to 18. And one thing that I notice about many of them, that they are very high in social intelligence, okay? Many of them are. The other thing is, and so the reason for that is, as you start talking to them, interacting with them, you learn that they're very good at interacting with just about anybody. You put them with little kids, they can interact with little kids. You put them with their peers, they're accepted by lots of different groups. They're super smooth at talking with adults. And that's a skill. It's a really high skill set. It's also something that makes them vulnerable. Because when they have all these social interactions, they can maneuver within all these groups, they meet somebody, right? And then they start getting ideas about things. The other thing that makes them vulnerable is they tend to be a little overconfident. They're a little smarter than the average duck. How many of you have a teenager who is a little bit smarter than just about everybody else, especially you? Anybody have one of those? I've got 3. Okay? And when I start talking about this stuff that I deal with on a regular basis, I think I know a little more than they might, right? This is the response I get. Really? Right? Or, that's not really how it goes, Dad. That's not really what it's like in school. I'm like, I'm the discipline guy for the biggest district in Minnesota. Like, I think I know. You don't. So this is kind of the thing that you're dealing with. So what I I'd like to do is maybe just give you some talking points a little bit. Because I think that's the hardest part, is when you're working through some of these things, and as a parent, you're starting to feel like that ogre, that overbearing parent that is just asking too many questions, and then your kids are telling you how their friends' parents don't bother them that much, and you're so overbearing. And then my response is, I can't help it if they're not parenting well. That's not my problem, okay? I'm gonna keep bothering you. So, they don't like that answer very much. But the point I'm trying to make is I think it's a lot of this, these folks, information is the most important thing. So everything that you're hearing today is super important. Being informed and aware and understanding is important. I think the other thing, though, is understanding your son or daughter a little bit, okay? And using information in conversations that I think will appeal to your son or daughter. So in some cases, for example, when I meet with certain kids, I can take the tack of if you keep doing this, you're going to end up in jail, this is a gateway drug, and those kinds of things. And for some kids that works. That fear piece is what they need maybe to motivate them. Because it's true, I'm not lying to them. I mean, these are things that can really happen, okay? But you may have a son or daughter that rolls their eyes at that and they say, that ain't gonna happen to me, right? I'm not dumb like the other people who use this stuff. I won't get caught. I don't. That's what they're thinking in their head potentially, okay? Or I just wouldn't do that. And so it's kind of appealing to their common sense. So, and I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna piggyback off of what Mike said. You have a powerful influence, okay? I know it doesn't feel like it, okay? Especially when you get the facial expressions or the blow up or the anger and they walk away from you. But I will tell you, they're gonna circle back in a different mood at some point, right? They will think about what you're saying. And so it's just super important for you to know how influential you are. And I'm gonna give you an example of the power of influence. So a lot of the statistics you heard about use is very concerning. But I'm going to tell you one thing that almost every kid that I see for marijuana use, whether it's through a device or traditional marijuana, okay, when I ask them if they would smoke cigarettes, I'm telling you it's 90 percentile will say to me, well, no, those are dangerous. And I'm looking at them like, oh, tell me more. Well, they're addictive, they cause lung cancer or whatever. Okay. And I asked them, do you think marijuana, for example, is dangerous? Well, no. Why not? Well, it's grown in the ground. Well, so are poisonous plants. Do you smoke those? Well, no. So the point I'm trying to make is thinking a little bit like a kid, I think, is a really important thing. And oftentimes, I think these things are important, but you also have to have some common sense with kids and kind of work through what they're doing. So if, for example, if you've learned that your son or daughter is maybe hanging out in the bathroom, vaping, that sort of a thing, I think a good thing to maybe be talking to them about is when they say, well, this is normal, this is what most kids do, right? Everybody's vaping, right? And then you say to them, so help me how it's normal to be standing over a toilet that somebody just used with your buddy, and that's like normal. Well, no, that's not normal, right? Anything and everything you can use to kind of shift the conversation and not normalize the behavior. And the truth of the matter is, while the statistics are alarming, I want to remind everybody, most kids aren't doing this. They're not doing it. And so helping your kids understand that that's not normal. The other thing that I would just ask you to, and I'll be quiet because I know other people got to talk, but one thing that I have a big radar for is friendship changes. Okay? So most kids have friends and school friends, right? But be aware of friendship changes, because friendship changes are usually a potential signal or sign of not a bad thing, but like kids experiment. They want to know and get to know other people, and sometimes their new friendship group has different norms, right? And in that group, the norms may be things that aren't healthy for you, okay? And so it's easy to get caught up into that. So the more that you ask questions, the more that you're aware of, you hover, check phones. Yeah, I will remind, as Mr. Dickman said, I'm pretty sure you're all paying for those phones, right? So it's important for you to kind of ride that line all the time, between hovering. It's a tough line to ride, but it is important to kind of be aware of friendships and what kids are talking about and that sort of thing. And then asking them questions about it. Not grilling them, not interrogating them, but asking them questions. Because that's what the parents do. And I remind lots of parents of that. Good parenting is hard. It's really, really hard. Bad parenting is easy. Okay? And so stay the course, be vigilant. That's what good parents do. It's hard work, but when you do the hard work, your kids turn out great, okay? All right, if you have any questions about our discipline policies or practices, I'll be around, and I'm happy to talk to you about that. Thank you.
Or ask them during the time. All right, so we'll transition our panel here. We'll slide these tables over. I'd like to ask our guests to join us here. All right, so you've had a chance to meet almost everybody here, but I'm gonna turn the mic over And I'm going to allow everyone to introduce themselves one more time, and then we're, I think, in the process. Does anybody have any note cards with questions on them? I've got some here. But we'll go down and introduce ourselves, and then we'll ask some questions.
In case you missed me, Heidi Larson with the American Lung Association.
Detective Dickman, Brooklyn Park Police, and the school resource officer at Shannon Park.
Christina Colthrad, I'm the school social worker at Andover High School.
Hi, I'm Rachel McCarg. I'm the school nurse at Coon Rapids Middle School.
Greg Cole, principal of Compass, and I have district-wide responsibility for discipline.
Amber Hewitt, I work for Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenges Know the Truth program, and I host the chemical support groups in the Anoka-Hennepin schools.
And I'm Rose McKinney. I'm a parent of 3 kids that have gone through Anoka-Hennepin schools, class of 07, class of 2010, and class of 2018. And I'm also a parent of a young person in recovery. So we've been through this path, and I'm part of the task force here that Mike alluded to. I wanted to see this happen, and I'm so glad that we're getting parents together, we're getting the district together, and resources. So happy to answer questions from a parent's perspective.
Yeah, so a face to the story. Rose is one of the parents who approached me 4 years ago, and here we are today. So I've got a few questions. If you've got a question on your card, please write it on there, and I will have somebody collect them. That may have already happened. So first of all, panel members, what do I do if I know my child is using, and or what do I do if I suspect use?
Well, one thing I talked about is if you're suspecting it, do checks. Check the phone, check the room, check the backpack. It might just give you the confirmation or either for or against what your suspicion is.
And I would just suggest, like we've heard multiple times tonight, have the conversation with your kids. On the Know the Truth table, there's a resource about holding a conversation with your kid. You can't go into it angry, you can't be yelling, you can't be blaming. That's not going to help. So check out the resource, it's really great. There's also some kind of like a map on how to handle that conversation, setting boundaries, things like that.
Always, always trust your gut. And it doesn't mean that your gut is right, but to what Officer Dickman said and Amber said, if you have a suspicion, there's probably a reason why, and it's really worth starting that conversation and checking it out. And do not be afraid to share that with your friends, your neighbors, people at school, because chances are they're going to say, oh, we've experienced the same thing, or I know someone who, and it opens up a positive conversation. The more you talk about it, the less there's stigma around it, and the more you can actually get to some answers and some solutions.
Now I know I was getting blank looks on the note card conversation. You didn't have them yet, so all right. You got time. I got a few. We've got a few loaded questions here too. So, what is the school policy if you get caught vaping? And then just wave your card in the air, and we'll come to it.
So right now, our school district treats e-cigarettes or any vaping devices very similar to the use of tobacco products. It can be, kind of depending on the circumstances, it can be anywhere from a conference and a phone call home to parents, maybe some type of in-school consequence, up to 3 days of suspension. We do treat those differently than marijuana, THC oil, and any chemical or controlled substance, other hard drugs, alcohol, those kinds of things. There's different consequences for those.
So, example, a kid who's smoking THC pure wax, let's say, is no different than a kid who's smoked a bowl of that, right? Where that would be and that's smoking weed, even if the delivery system is an e-cig.
That is correct. Yep.
Okay. And we usually figure that stuff out through the process of our investigation. And a kid who's smoked hash oil tends to be behaving a little bit differently than a kid who's vaped with tobacco. Who can I talk to at school for the support? So I think this is a very important question.
Hi. Well, I think, you could talk to really anyone at school. If you have a great relationship with your school nurse, call her, they're all women. Or like your school counselor or AP, and then they can channel you to the right person, but, or even a teacher, reach out. We can't work in a vacuum. I call parents all the time.
One thing that's common is I think when people's kids are little, parents tend to share a lot more information with each other. As your kids get older, that happens a lot less, partly because you end up being a little more isolated, and so then there's this idea that everybody else's kids must not be doing these things that my kids are doing. It is super important, if you don't feel safe talking to somebody that maybe you know or what have you that's also a parent, because some of this stuff has a lot of shame to it, and that's, I think that prevents conversations from happening. I can tell you that there's just so many people who have questions, that's normal. So if you do come to a school official and so forth, one thing that you can have some confidence in is that it should be treated confidentially, right? And if they're not going to act like an expert in something that they're not. So if they feel like the conversation that you're having is one that maybe they're not the most qualified, they're going to put you in the hands of somebody that maybe can help you with more specific information. Okay, but it is really important to reach out to people.
It's really important to find the entry point, and it's certain schools there's different entry points, right? At Champlain Park High School, we have a house office system. We have a really good entry point for us as the counselor, right? And the counselor will be directing a lot of that traffic. Okay, at many schools in the district don't have counselors, so a social worker, a school nurse might be that entry point. The important thing is to find an entry point, right? And let's be honest, Rose and I didn't have the conversation because she found a great entry point at Champlain Park High School. Okay? She ran into places where they were dead ends. They weren't entry points, right? And so our goal of all this work is to ultimately create entry points. And you become an entry point for someone when you actually have knowledge. Okay? So while we're working on parents, you are all becoming entry points for each other. As a school, as an organization, we need to continue to train our professionals to be entry points for people. Okay? Because let's face it, we're all going to go to somebody we have a relationship or feel a connection with. Okay? And I can try my best. I can try my best to be that supportive person for you, but if I know nothing about the signs and symptoms of use, all I can do is be a really supportive person who doesn't have any good information to provide for you. Okay? All right? So find an entry point and be persistent. Okay? Be really persistent. Okay, so we've got 3 questions on this sheet, so we'll take them one at a time. Is there always a cloud when someone who is vaping exhales? Can you always see the exhale?
I mean, I'd say yeah, but like her point, unless they're blowing in, or you mentioned it too. I've seen it where teachers have said, I'm pretty sure this kid vaped in my class, but I think he's just inhaling it and not exhaling until it dissipates in their lungs, and then you don't have it. So, I mean, with the e-cigarette, yeah, there always will be it unless they're doing ways to counteract it.
What do they do to those kids then?
Teacher discretion. I mean, if they turn back and see the big plume of smoke and they see it's that kid, yeah, it's to the office. If they turn back and they kind of hear the giggling and they know it happened, unfortunately they can't stop a class full of 30 kids and search them all. It's tough. You narrow it down, and then they might send an email saying, these 4 kids were sitting in the back corner. I think one of them was maybe vaping, and then as administrators or police, we can follow up with those 4 later. The nice thing is during a school day, we have 5 class periods to, answer any immediate action. We can take a second, figure out which kids they are, call them down, and catch them later.
Do they always take immediate action?
Yeah, there's times there's immediate action that's taken. Again, if they turn, they see the kid exhaling the smoke, they'll call the office, say, hey, somebody's going to get this kid. He was smoking.
I think we can help with this a little bit. It's not that simple, right? So one of the most, if I'm sitting smoking a cigarette in the back of your class like this, right? That's not really hard. You gotta go home, right? The trouble with some of these things is, first of all, as a teacher, of 150 kids a day, you have a relationship with your students. It's a really important relationship that you have, and then a lot of that's built on trust. And so if I suspect that maybe a student is doing that, you can go into that a lot of different ways. If you're accusing kids of doing things that they're not actually doing, that's going to be a significant problem, okay? Especially when you're talking to their parents about it and they have no history, there's no reason, why are you targeting my kid? That's a whole other conversation potentially. So these things are the thing that, I'll be honest with you, makes me angry with the people that make this garbage, is they're made specifically to conceal, to make it easy to do, to make it hard to detect. So obviously, I think most of our staff are looking for patterns. Or, so I might see something happening, this doesn't look right, I'm gonna enter into it potentially showing concern more than I'm gonna see if I can catch you. I'm concerned, and if the answers aren't coming back in a way that makes some sense, like this doesn't add up, then more than likely one kind of a way or another, I'm gonna report this to the office. Because our teachers don't want this happening in their classrooms, right? That's unhealthy for everybody. And so that's kind of it's a bit nuanced, right? It's not a simple matter of it's this or that, but yeah, the expectation is absolutely they're dealing with it or referring it to an administrator if they suspect that students are using these devices in their classrooms.
Yeah, and we take it, I will just tell you from the principal's perspective, we take these things very seriously, right? And it would be one thing if everything was overt in our schools, but nothing is overt anymore. Everything is covert, right? And turning over covert information is really challenging. It takes time, right? And I will tell you, as I mentioned statistically, as I said, 850, just think about that, there are 852 registered cities in the state of Minnesota. And the school I'm proud to be principal of runs larger than 650 cities in the state of Minnesota every day, 3,000 people, 80 acres. I mean, our neighboring Osseo, we are larger than, okay? We have 4 assistant principals working with this one. They have over 700 kids per person, right? And that's an amazing ratio, right? And you have one chemical violation you deal with, it takes you half the day to investigate and do all those pieces, right? It's an amazingly overwhelming task on so many levels. And it is student safety that drives our every step in our school organization, right? And so feel great as parents knowing that if you have a concern, contact our school officials. We don't push these things to the side because we know that this is all a component of school safety. The large majority of our kids will feel more safe if they walk into a bathroom and know they never have to worry about 3 kids huddled around something, smoking something, right? These are safety factors. And every school is implementing different strategies to continue to make their schools more safe, right? At the end of the day, safety equals, feelings of safety and comfort equal increased learning, right? We know that for sure, so. Okay, at what age do most youth start to try vaping?
Yeah, that's a good question. It varies. We have seen issues with even elementary, middle school. I mean, there can be young kids that are trying. I can't say for certain exactly the magic age of when we're seeing kids pick up e-cigarettes or vape or try vaping. We have heard young as 10. So it kind of varies. But teens, definitely just the youth use in general is very concerning.
And not from a research perspective, but I can say from a perspective of power of influence, right? And access. Those are things that are huge factors in people's choice to use, right? And then a question that I had in my own mind, so when we were talking about the smoking a joule, if smoking an entire joule that's like this big equals like 40 cigarettes potentially, right? A pack to 40 cigarettes. What is one hit of a joule equal? Is it like 1 cigarette? Or do we know that?
That's a good question. It could be about that. I suppose it depends on how the user is using it as well. So how long they're inhaling, how deep they're inhaling. So kids are using even a pod, maybe more per day, we're hearing. So it just kind of depends on how they're using it too.
I would be willing to bet that if we each went home with a homework assignment and said how many hits or puffs or inhales are in an average joule, that might tell us, right? If we took if it's 40 inhales and we know that it's potentially 40 cigarettes worth of tobacco, then maybe every inhale is 1 cigarette, which is pretty alarming when you think about it.
I would say it's about between 100 to 200 puffs maybe if you get per joule. 200?
According to Google.
Okay.
Thank you.
Google it.
Okay. Put the information right at our fingertips. All right.
I think it depends too on what the kids are vaping. From my experience from the support groups in the Anoka-Hennepin school district, the students aren't vaping with jewels anymore. They're vaping with the Nords and the Novos and those higher tech ones that do have the salt nicotine. I don't really meet with any kids who don't use the salt nicotine anymore. So, an average cigarette has about, depending on the cigarette, there's, light cigarettes and heavier cigarettes. anywhere from 8 to potentially 14% nicotine, and you have these kids that are hitting at 50% nicotine. I mean, you know, I guess you can.
So some questions in relation to hash oil or THC oil. So first of all, is it sold in stores, or where do kids get hash oils or a wax or dabs?
So the homemade wax and dabs and stuff like that, we don't really see at the school. That's more drug houses and stuff like that. But like I talked about, we see the carts, the cartridges that are just, you purchase them and they just come oil ready, 95% THC. Like the couple kids I've caught, where do you get them? Online. They get shipped. It's like one kid will buy a bunch of them and then sell them to the rest of them. Like they all kind of go in on it, and then one takes the risk and gets it shipped to wherever. And then he disseminates it out to other kids. So it's all online right now, it being legalized halfway across the country.
A very popular cart box, marketing box, is, I don't know if it's just one company, but they will sell them in they make little tiny cereal boxes. So it's Captain Crunch, Trix, Lucky Charms, all those kind. It looks exactly like a little tiny cereal box, and that's what they sell them in. But I don't think they're marketing to kids, but.
Dank is the company that makes it.
So yeah, you can. I mean, that's just something to keep an eye out for. And the kids will tell you. I mean, these are high school kids. They think the boxes are cool because it looks just like the Captain Crunch box that you eat cereal out of. It says Captain Crunch.
So on many levels, the internet is our friend, but not in the battle against substances like this, where you can order lots of different substances. So if you start getting packages, be mindful of those, right? So how old do you need to be to buy THC? Well,
In Minnesota,
you can't buy it, right? It's illegal. And does THC have marijuana in it? Well, marijuana has THC in it. And so, I mean, anybody can speak to that, but the reality is when somebody smokes marijuana, they're smoking it because of the THC content, right? And so the reality is when kids are smoking hash oils, they're smoking this manufactured product that has a significantly higher percentage of THC, that drug that gets you. And THC in itself, I mean, you can go research THC. It's a fat-soluble chemical. Your brain's fat-soluble, right? There's a bunch of things that that THC attaches itself to, which in itself is a problem. So, Amber, you look like you want to say something.
No, yeah, you are doing a great job.
Yeah. So, okay, let's see. I think we have. It's been suggested to go to various school staff. However, that results in punishment and sometimes losing. For instance, a sport makes sense for teenagers, more likely to do more advice. Did I read that correctly? Yeah. It's been suggested to go to various school staff, however. Yeah. Okay, so sometimes there's punishment in going to staff, right? So, and certainly if a kid is in a sport, there are consequences, right?
So I think, and someone can correct me.
I'm understanding this to be the concern. If I go and talk to the school officials and my kid is in a sport and I'm revealing that my kid is doing things that they shouldn't be doing, am I kind of getting my son or daughter into trouble? Yes or no? I think that's a really good question. I would say that I would talk to an administrator and just speak about general concerns to start with, okay, and worries and that sort of a thing. And I think that probably what's going to happen is they would likely recommend maybe you pursue a therapist, a licensed therapist, or potentially a chemical dependency expert. I'm going to let these folks talk too. There's other organizations that can provide you with support, and so that you don't have to have that worry, okay? Because the point is we want them to stop, right, and get the help that they need.
So if you do have a student in the Anoka-Hennepin school district and you have concerns, but you feel like they're not being honest, you could always go to the school and just say, hey, could I see if my student could meet with the Know the Truth chemical health support specialist. I don't report back to teachers. I report if the students are showing up to group, if they're participating or not, but it's more just a process of like gently guiding them. I don't ever tell them like you should or shouldn't be doing this. I have the ability to use my own personal stories and hardships to kind of help them out. Like I'm always like, well, this is what I did and this is what happened to me. And a lot of times they want to open up. I am a mandated reporter. That's one of the first things I always tell them. If you talk about hurting yourself, somebody else, bringing a bomb to school, any abuse that's happened to you that hasn't been reported, I do need to report that. Other than that, what we talk about stays between us. And I think once I tell them that, it's this level of comfort. And I just really enjoy it because a lot of times walking through these things, you can kind of see the light bulb going on. And like, oh, I do see how this is affecting my life. And I didn't think the marijuana use was a big deal, but you're right, I'm not doing good in school. None of my friends that are smoking pot are doing good in school, things like that. So that's always an option also.
I'll throw in there to the earlier question about how immediate does something happen? Not very immediately. In that, they want to investigate it, etc. So as a parent, I would encourage you, if you are concerned, do start with kind of some general questions. I remember talking to the school resource officer because I was concerned. I wanted to know what were the legal ramifications, what could happen to my kid, etc. I didn't have to say, my kid is doing this. I had to say, I'm concerned. And as I became more educated, then I was able to say, okay, here's what's going on. What should we do about that? And so I think finding that problem-solving relationship with the school, it's not going to happen quickly. I will also say as a parent, there were times that I wished it would have happened quickly because I was looking for that heavy hand to come down and say, you're off the team. You're using this. No, it doesn't happen like that. And in hindsight, that would not have fixed it because that would have been a reaction versus a solution. But when you're in the thick of it and you're worried about your kid and they are using and things are out of control, yeah, you want that quick fix. Nothing about this is quick. And so the smarter you can get, the more resources you can tap, and the more that you can know that we have resources available, the better it will be, no matter what that situation is.
Yeah, from a school perspective, finding positive engagement and ways to be invested in the school setting are really important. Sports are important. I mean, they're, to me, are one of the reasons why I'm in a leadership role because of my experience in high school and college athletics. But I also know that my choices related to chemicals would have impacted my ability to do that, right? And as a principal, we have kids every year who are making decisions outside of the school day that impact their participation in state high school league rule because of violations, right? So we're bound by those. That doesn't mean that you call and say, we have a concern about your kid, that we're going to immediately report your child to the state high school league. That's not how it works. The flip side is if you believe you have a concern, you don't say anything, and then all of a sudden the chief of police sends us a letter that says, hey, so-and-so was busted for a minor consumption. Now we have to respond, and we have a duty and an obligation to work with the state high school league on those topics of conversation. There was one other question, I'll wrap it up in this, and I'll just answer the question. We have the majority of our students, statistically, I think at Champlain Park High School, 97% of our students never get suspended from school one day. Okay, an amazing statistic, right? Most of our time is spent on the 3% or less, right? In terms of a discipline perspective. 97% of this, we have lots of kids who are very well-intended kids who witness things that they want to try to do something about, right? So if your kid comes home and says, hey, I witnessed this today, always encourage them to speak to the administrators or a teacher at their school. You can always send an email to staff at school. Sometimes kids don't like the optics of going into the administrator's office, right? The NARC or whatever, right? The reality is we will never be able to do anything about something that we don't know about, right? And so if you want to, as the advocate, as the parent or guardian, to reach out to a school official and share a concern, you absolutely should do that. And the reason you reach out to school staff and not the police is because they are there in a system to help us. We actually are in a position where we can function on reasonable suspicion as an organization, okay? He operates on probable cause, okay? And so your kids don't check their rights at the door when they come into the school, but we serve in this role called in loco parentis, right? So we get to function a little bit differently than law enforcement. So we get concerns passed on to us. We have some justification in doing things that the police have to have different manners in which they search a kid's property. Okay, and so it's really important for you to communicate with us and know that you have really well-intended school officials who are, again, ultimately looking to create those safe and welcoming environments for kids that they can go into any space and feel like it's a safe space for them. Okay?
Just to follow up on that, sometimes, and you may have heard this before, what will happen is something gets reported or the students are convinced that somebody did X, Y, or Z, and then they see the student in school the next day, and therefore they're convinced nothing happened, okay? If we get a report, I guarantee you something happened. We investigate. And what we conclude from that investigation may not be what, certain students are convinced of or what have you, but we're always keeping track of that information. So obviously if somebody does something and they stop, maybe they get away. I'll let you know that kids do get away with stuff. I've got a few of you who are speeding on Highway 10 on the way here, and you got away with it, right? I mean, it happens. It's not that, the goal is we don't want students doing things that aren't okay. So, oftentimes students stop doing the things they shouldn't be doing, which is the goal. But I do want to address that is when we get those reports, we investigate them, we look into them, we draw conclusions, we keep track. Obviously, if somebody continues to do the same thing, frequency is usually something that changes the game, and now we're potentially looking at discipline or consequences. Last thing too, something Rose said about trusting your gut. When you're talking to your kids, I would just advocate trust your own common sense. So when you're talking through something, all of us want to believe our kids, okay? It's not about whether they're liars or not liars or any of that kind of stuff, right? And I will tell you, sometimes parents will say, well, my kid doesn't lie or they don't lie to me, or I know when they lie. I'm going to tell you, you're in first place of the people they will lie to, right? You're in first place. And that's not a bad thing. It's because they don't want to disappoint you. You're their parents, right? And so understand the motivation why they might not share information, but trust your gut as if you're talking through something and there's this piece of it that does not make sense, right? And we're kind of inclined to go, okay, right? If you circle back to that, tell me more about that,
Good advice. I'll wrap my part by saying, don't hesitate, don't wait. These things don't go away, and so the sooner you kind of muster up the decision to at least investigate it, the sooner you'll know if it's a problem. And maybe the good news is you'll find out, no, it's not a problem, or there's something else going on that we can address. But if you wait, it doesn't just go away. And then you've missed some time and some opportunities to make a positive difference. But yeah, I've only smoked like 5 times. I've only smoked like 5 times today. That's what we learned. It was always like, oh no, it's my buddies. Yeah, it's my buddies and I have one just like it. Read a little bit more into it. And again, these aren't bad kids. They're not. They're good kids that kind of get caught up in something. And when you're doing something that they all know it's not right and it's not healthy, they've learned that since the time they were little. And that's why they hide and protect it. And if it is a problem, if it is something that has become more serious in its addiction, that's why they hide and they lie about it. They're not hiding and lying because they're bad. They're hiding and lying because they've become dependent on something that they feel sick without. And that's where the compassion and the smarts and everything comes into it. So thank you for the chance to just give you a little bit of insight from a parent's perspective and to all of our experts, because we're working together on this.
And I think it's also important to remember, even if you don't suspect your kid is doing these things, to have the talk with them. As parents, we taught our kids how to crawl, we taught them how to walk, we had the stranger danger talk with them. You know what I mean? Talk to them about these things. Thanks.
So just a couple of housekeeping things. You can't like us on Facebook or whatever because we're actually on there. So your way of liking us is just please provide us some feedback on that survey. We're constantly looking to evolve our information that we share with families. And so while providing us that evaluation, it's also good for you to spread the word with your community members. Okay, we know we compete with a lot of things in these events, but we do believe that the information is really critical, and this was I believe to be a really beneficial evening tonight. I want to thank our panel members and presenters. There's some people just behind the scenes that are really important to thank. Behind you, Liz Burgard. Liz is in the pink there. She works for our district. She helps to supervise and coordinate volunteers in our school district. And then Janet Kimmel is part of our communications department. She's been really pivotal in putting together communications to promote this event. And in the back, I don't think Dr. Cherry is here any longer. She's the exec. Well, hi. Dr. Cherry, she's executive director of the Student Services Department, as well as the chair of our Chemical Health Advisory Committee for the district. So she's certainly taken a leadership role in this work. And then other community members or committee members of the Chemical Health Advisory Committee, Stephanie Johnson, who's back there, who loves to speak in front of people and was disappointed she wasn't able to do so today. Stephanie Grace, wave your hand. She's a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, and a very good friend of mine who's helped me in my own journey with my peers, or my siblings, excuse me, through my life, but is also a student achievement advisor here in our school district, and whoever else has gone unnamed. We can't do this without you. Folks, we appreciate your feedback. We appreciate you taking your time out of what has clearly been the best day in several days. And so thank you for coming and spending here with us here this evening. Feel free to visit the tables, and otherwise have a blessed evening.